Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to your Tuesday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am David Grubb. Thank you for joining me. We are in day two already of the NBA free agent period, and the New Orleans Pelicans have made their first move. We'll get into that. We'll talk about the upcoming rumors about the Pelicans and what could be next for them, as well as the problem that has been persistent with the Pelicans offense for some time, their inability to take and make three-pointers. We'll look at that as well. But first, I just wanted to get into the overall free agency landscape in the NBA and talk about how it impacts the Pelicans and how they ended up where they were. If you remember yesterday, before we even got into these signings, before the Kevon Looney signing was announced, I talked about the big reasons for the Pelicans when it came to what could be available to them in free agency. You had to look at two factors. You had to look at how much money that they have available, which isn't a tremendous amount, and you also had to look at who would be available to the New Orleans Pelicans in free agency, and that pool was more limited because, quite frankly, if you're a free agent, you're looking for a couple of things, right? You're looking for money, looking for hits, and you're looking for the opportunity to win. And look, there was a run on the center market on Monday and into Tuesday, where those players got snatched up pretty quickly. You can see the teams who had a desire to get some contributors in the front court went out and did that. Whether you're talking about Nas Reed basically agreeing to his deal before free agency began, or you're talking about Miles Turner agreeing to this mega deal with the Milwaukee Bucks, dramatically reshaping their roster as well. I think there are a couple of good things when you look at this from the Pelicans' perspective. Number one, you are less concerned today about what Milwaukee does this season in relation to that 2026 first-round pick. The Bucks look like they are really trying to make a run again in the Eastern Conference to build around Giannis Antetokounmpo. Certainly, getting rid of Dame Lillard is a controversial move in the way that the Bucks are going to have to pay his contract of essentially $23-24 million over the next 5 years, and put Dame back into the free agent market, which, he probably won't sign to start the year, obviously, because of as he recovers from Achilles tear. But again, for the Pelicans business, they're a good sign. You want Milwaukee to do that. On the other end, Turner leaving Indiana. Pelicans fan, you have to be kind of happy with Miles Turner leaving Indiana as well, because Indiana does have that top four protected pick that the Pelicans sent back to them, and it's more and more likely that pick, um, you know, I don't think will fall into that top four area. But it looks like the Pacers might actually be kind of bad this year as well. So if it does end up in the top four, that helps the Pelicans out, obviously, a great deal. So some good movement in that regard, just on one free agency move. When you look around the rest of the centers that are available, Brook Lopez goes to the Clippers. Another opportunity with a contender, a perennial playoff team, and an opportunity to split time with Ivica Zubac there, which makes a lot of sense. Zubac, the interior presence, Brook Lopez, a great defender and offensive rebounder, also somebody who can shoot it from there, giving them that kind of support, which could be really impactful for the Clippers. Al Horford has yet to resign, but it looks like Boston intends to bring him back. John Collins picked up his option in Utah. Day'Ron Sharpe signed again with the Nets on probably what was a below market deal, but it's clear that he feels like that's the place for him. Clint Capella goes back to Houston on a 3-year, $21.5 million deal. Again, you just saw all these centers. Luke Cornett goes to San Antonio. Up and coming teams. These are veteran centers, but they chose either teams that were in contention or teams that they clearly knew what their role was. Andre Drummond going back to Philly goes there because you don't know what the status is with Joel Embiid. You still have an opportunity to play and get minutes. I think the one guy that you didn't really get to talk about was Chris Boucher. Chris Boucher is a little bit older and not as physical as a Kevon Looney. So, when you look at the overall rankings where the Pelicans are, no, they didn't get the flashiest, biggest name in the center market, but they got the player that ultimately they could afford and who fits with their trying to do. Uh, he isn't somebody that the Pelicans are committed to for 10 years. This is a player that when you look at his future, it's only a 2-year deal. The Pelicans can absolutely move on to someone else if they find either a better center option or their young centers, their young forwards slash centers, and Derek Queen and Emisi prove that they're the kind of building blocks that you don't need a veteran to be a starter. Kevon Looney isn't coming in to be the starter. I don't think he can start. We know he can start. He started, plenty of games for the Warriors over the years. But I don't think you have to utilize him as a starter in this position. This is a guy who rarely plays over 20 minutes a game. And if you recall, what I said yesterday was that's what was available. You didn't have 30 minutes available on the free agent market. You didn't have that kind of player available. You had this player who was available to give you 18 to 20 minutes a night, who can do all the little things. If you look at his on-off numbers, he's been a positive every year. He's a guy who his net ratings are fantastic. His advanced numbers are all great. The one area he really struggles in is his free throw shooting. Not a great free throw shooter. Shoots about 60% from the free throw line. Also, he's not a three-point shooter. You know those things. So you don't have that kind of spacing at the center spot when you're talking about Queen or Misi or in this case, Kevon Looney. You don't have a lot of great spacing as far as their shooting abilities. But remember, we talked offensively. If you are running the right kind of offense and Kevon Looney gets to change positions as a screener, if he gets to move into the dunker spot, if he gets to not just be a stationary target, then he can be effective offensively. He's not going to take bad shots. He's not going to try to do more than what he's capable of. He's going to stay within his abilities. So I think that's why this is a good player for the Pelicans to have. You can look at some of his offensive numbers and say they're very modest, but I think it's very important. If we remember this, there wasn't really a veteran who the Pelicans could learn from. These young Pelicans could learn from in the post last season. Daniel Tice was around, but he's not really a great post defender, not a shot blocker, not a guy who I think could reach this group. But when you bring in a Kevon Looney, a guy who's got 3 NBA championships to his credit, and has been a valuable piece of those championship teams. When you've got that, when you've got a guy who has defended against some of the high-level bigs, on a nightly basis in the NBA, when you get a guy who understands what it is to do the little things on the offensive end, I think that's really important when you have these young bigs who are trying to learn. He's not going to teach Derek Queen how to score, but if he teaches Derek Queen to be a better offensive player, to have a higher basketball IQ, if he gives the better defensive instruction to Yves Misi, if he can teach him, the subtle tricks of the game. And Kevon Looney's also a guy who's big on his fitness, who's going to be in the gym, who's going to be consistent on a daily basis and be a pro. And he's not being put in a position where he has to carry anything. I think it's all, if you're going to be a veteran on an NBA roster now, there are only like 3 classes of veterans. There's the veteran star, which we see players' careers going longer and longer. So these stars are able to hold on to their extended prime past their mid-30s now. And so you have that veteran. Then you have the role-playing veteran who's the starter. And then you have the end-of-the-bench veteran or the emergency veteran who's there for culture, kind of like Garrett Temple, who continues to get jobs in the NBA. He hasn't played meaningful minutes in years, but teams continue to re-sign Garrett Temple to have him at the end of the bench as a positive influence. Kevon Looney is more valuable than that. He's not going to sit at the end of the bench and not play. He's going to be a regular part of this rotation, but he does bring some credibility to the locker room, and he brings it at a level that some of these guys need. And he also already has a ally in the locker room in Jordan Poole, a guy who he played with in Golden State and won a championship with at Golden State. And you saw Poole's reaction on social media. He's very excited about this pairing and bringing Kevon Looney to New Orleans. So I think that helps as well when you already have someone that you recognize, someone that you've been to battle with, who can come in and be a part of this with you. That makes it more familiar for Jordan Poole, who they need to play well this season. It makes it a little bit easier in a transition for Kevon Looney to come into a locker room, again, with a familiar face and be able to build from that together. I think those are good things in relation to the New Orleans Pelicans. Kevon Looney is not going to be the starter. I'm going to say that again. This is still Yves Missy's job as the starting center as of today, unless Derek Queen ends up as your starting center. And I just don't see Willie Green or the Pelicans putting Derek Queen in that position to start the season. He may earn that over the course of the year. He may prove to be the best option for the Pelicans at center, but I don't think opening night he's your center. I think it's still Yves Misy with the opportunity to get your change of pace in Carlo Makovic, who can run the floor better, who shoots the outside shot better, who's more athletic than either Misy or Looney. And then you have Looney to do the little things, particularly with your second unit, where it's so important that they execute well because their talent is not as high as the starting unit. Their experience is not going to be as high as the starting unit. So to have somebody who you don't, again, have to instruct, that you don't have to tell to be in the right position, you don't have to force to be in the right place, who knows his responsibilities on both ends of the floor, I think ultimately is a benefit to the Pelicans. No, it does not solve the center problem. I'll say that before moving on one more time for people who don't hear me. No, this does not solve their long-term needs at center. But in the short term, this is a good team building move. This is a good team building move for the New Orleans Pelicans. My friend Scoop B, Brandon Robinson, has been talking about the New Orleans Pelicans on social media. And what he has talked about is that the Pelicans still plan on being active in the free agency period, trying to find guard help and wing help. The other part of the rumor is that they are shopping Jordan Hawkins to make that happen. If they don't find a partner to trade for Jordan Hawkins, I believe that then that Hawkins is a candidate to be outright released by the New Orleans Pelicans. They, don't want to, it doesn't feel like they want to be in the long-term business with Jordan Hawkins. He could be a necessity simply because they want to make sure that they have as much shooting on the roster as possible. But I think if you can find better help that's available and get a little bit older, because this is a very young team, and the history of the league does not benefit really young teams unless they are uber talented like the Oklahoma City Thunder. And that's not this Pelican squad. It has talent, but there's a lot more diamonds in the rough or gems that have to be polished in order for the Pelicans to reach their full potential. So when you look at that, they could, especially in your bench, if you're going to have these two youngsters in particular, in Fears and Queen, that you're trying to set up for a great future, I think having more veterans on the bench to complement them is a better part of the strategy. To have more veterans who make it easier for these young players when they're on the court is probably your best option, especially if you're trying to remain competitive. If the New Orleans Pelicans intend on making the postseason this year, they should probably add some more short-term veterans and get off some of these young players who are not going to reach their full potential in New Orleans, who may not find their best years until their second contract, but are not currently worth the investment for New Orleans, considering you have better younger players that you do need to invest in. You can cultivate two youngsters at a time. It is really hard to cultivate 4, 5, 6 young players at one time. So the Pelicans, I think if they make that decision to stick with cultivating Fears, cultivating Queen, and going out and finding more capable veteran help on the free agent market for that second unit to make that bench a strength rather than a problem as it was last year, then I think that that's a good move for the New Orleans Pelicans as they move deeper into the offseason. There's going to be plenty of young players out there who are available, and there's a reason that they're available is because they are bigger question marks rather than they provide answers for any team. So I think, again, there are some veteran options that the Pelicans really need to consider. All right, this last segment today is going to be a little bit longer because we're going to get into some data as we look at the Pelicans. And one of the bigger problems with the New Orleans Pelicans has been their lack of three-point shooting. And this problem has persisted since the beginning of the Zion Williamson era. If I'm going to show you some numbers, and we're going to go through a few screens on this. So first, I want to show you, this is three-pointers made per game over the last 6 seasons. The red line that you see here is the New Orleans Pelicans. The blue line is the NBA champion for that year. So I'm not putting the Pelicans up against the best three-point shooting team of that season. I'm putting the Pelicans up against the NBA champion each season. And if you'll notice, there's only one season where the Pelicans made more three-pointers per game than the NBA champion, and that's in 2020. That team was the Los Angeles Lakers, who shot and made a historically low in this era, in the last 20 years, who shot one of the lowest um, three-point marks amongst NBA champions, and certainly the lowest of the past decade. Just 11 three-pointers made for the Pelicans. I mean, for the Lakers. But as you can see, in each subsequent year, there's a significant gap between the New Orleans Pelicans and the threes made by the NBA champion per game. By year, by year, if we're looking at 3 points made, the Pelicans made 26% more threes than the champ in 2020. But every year after that, in 2021, they made 26% fewer threes than the champion. In 2022, they made 25.9% fewer threes than the NBA champion. In 2023, the Denver Nuggets win, another team that doesn't shoot a ton of threes. That's the closest the Pelicans get at negative 6.8%. 2024 it goes back up to 24%. And then last year, 17%. Again, another team in the Oklahoma City Thunder that do not outpace everybody when it comes to 3-point shots. So the Pelicans just getting made threes. Again, the mark is somewhere above 14. If we're looking at what's the most consistent, it's between 14 and 17, but generally between 14 and 15 over these past 6 seasons. So the Pelicans need to increase their output by roughly 2 3-pointers per game. They've got to make every night 2 more 3-pointers per game. Can they do that? Well, let's look at attempts, because there's also a pretty significant gap when it comes to attempts. The 40 number that has been pushed by Willie Green is not necessary. The 40 number is not necessary. You see only one team in the past 6 years, that being the Boston Celtics, who shoot an inordinate amount of threes relative to the rest of the league. The Boston Celtics are the only ones who top 40. But what you do see, again, since 2020, the only season when the Pelicans outpaced the NBA champs is a consistent gap between the Pelicans and the best team in the NBA. 17% in 2021, 18% in 2022. Gap again lowered against the Nuggets, but you're still behind the Nuggets at minus 4%. 2024, that goes up to 23%. And then last season, it was about 10.9%. Overall, the average for those 6 seasons is a negative 14.7% difference. That's considerable. So the Pelicans need to increase their attempts. They've not been past 35 attempts in a season since 2020 under Alvin Gentry. Since then, they've hovered in the neighborhood of 32 attempts per game. Last year was a bit more, getting closer to 35, but again, failing to reach that mark. The Pelicans have to be between, and we've done the math on this and kind of talked about it. They need to be between 35 to 38 attempts per night. That's generally where they've had the most success, when they're consistently around 35 in particular. On a night-to-night basis, when you look at the games where the Pelicans shoot at least 35 3-point attempts, they win at a very high clip, because the Pelicans have not been bad percentage-wise. As we move to this third chart, the percentages have actually been decent the last few years. Last year, it kind of fell off a cliff, but you'll see again, overall, the Pelicans have not been good enough percentage-wise either. Again, 2020, Alvin Gentry's last year as head coach, the only season on this list where the Pelicans shot the three better than the NBA champ. Since then, 2021, minus 11%, 2022, minus 9%, 2023, minus 4%, 2024, minus 1.3%, and then last year, minus 7.3%. These are subtle differences, an overall average of minus 6% compared to the NBA champion. But overall, when you look at these numbers, the Pelicans have consistently failed at making the three, at generating attempts, and at making it at a high percentage. It doesn't necessarily mean that the Pelicans need 10 shooters in the lineup, all right? Because another thing to look at is, are you generating shots for the right people? And one of the things that championship teams do, by and large, is generate the right looks for their best shooters. When you see the teams that have won championships in the past, go look at their top two 3-point shooters, whether it's Steph and Clay, whether it's Jason Tatum and Sam Hauser, or whomever it is, whatever your pair is. If you look at those two, it usually adds up to somewhere between 14 and 16 attempts between those top two players. The Pelicans have occasionally gotten to that area with Trey and with CJ. But the Pelicans, the bigger problem is that fall off and that lack of consistency. There is a tremendous fall off between the second shooter, whether that's Trey, or whether it's been CJ, and the third shooter in the Pelicans lineup. So your top two have been getting shots occasionally, not enough, not consistently enough, because especially when they share the lineup, Trey and CJ are not getting the same amount of shots as they normally do when one is in the lineup and not the other. That's a problem. The Pelicans have to find a way for, in this case, Jordan Poole and Trey Murphy to get 14 to 16 3-point attempts every night. Those two guys have to take between 14 and 16 3-point attempts every night. The third part of that is Brandon Ingram in those previous years really brought down that third player in the Pelicans group who was shooting the threes. So the Pelicans now have to make sure that that third player, whomever their third shooter is in this group, whether that be Sadiq Bey, whether that is Antonio Reeves, whether it's Jordan Hawkins if he's back, whether it's Jose Alvarado, whomever that third shooter is, needs to be getting up 5 attempts. If you're getting those first 3 players 19 to 23 attempts per night, 19 to 23, then you only need to make up another 12 attempts per game. And you spread those out amongst Herb Jones if he's taking 4 threes a night, which he should be. If you spread that out amongst Jeremiah Fears, how many threes is he taking? 2 or 3 every night he should be taking. Carlo Makovich should be taking a couple every night. You know what I'm saying? So as we look at this and what the lineup has, what the Pelicans lineup has, getting to that 35 number, in my opinion, is way more important than the Pelicans getting to 43s per night. But you have to be consistent in approaching that and making sure that you have an offense geared to getting guys those shots. And that's been a huge problem for Willie Green in setting up his shooters to get open looks without them having to work so hard for them. The offensive principles have to create those looks for the players. It can't just simply be them on their own making this happen. So that's going to be a big test for the Pelicans once again, particularly with the fact that they are likely going to struggle some on defense. You don't go from worst to first defensively. They are going to be better offensively, and they have to be better when it comes to shooting the ball from distance. That commitment to getting those shots up, that's the most bewildering problem of these last few years with Willie Green. Because to have the outward commitment, to keep saying we need to take more shots, to bring in a James Borrego who believes in pace and space and creating looks for 3-point shooters, to have consistently failed at creating looks in the corner, the easiest 3-point shot to take. There is a fundamental problem in the Pelicans' offensive philosophy. And whether James Borrego is back, whether somebody else is running the offense, or if it's all on Willie Green's shoulders this year, Willie Green has to figure out how to create those shots. And it's not going to be good enough to say that Trey has to be better. It's not going to be good enough to say Jordan Poole has to be better. It's not going to be good enough to say that guys have to knock down the shots that they're given. If you're not generating good looks, if you're not generating clean and open looks for your players, and certainly the presence of Zion Williamson impacts that as well in creating, those gaps in the defense and allowing the defense to collapse around him and creating those shots opposite him, open looks either in the corner or back up beyond the arc up top. Zion has a big influence on that. But you have to want to do this. And this has to be a part of your daily practice. As I said, yesterday, the Warriors are the Warriors no matter who's in the lineup. They're going to shoot it. They're going to move without the basketball, no matter who is in the lineup. And going back to Kevon Looney for one quick, just to throw this note, is that Kevon thrived in lineup shooters, non-shooters as well. He did his job. He was a positive player, whether he was playing with shooters or not. So if you're going to play lineups, and the Pelicans are going to occasionally have lineups with 3 non-shooters, as they would be classified on the floor, that's fine. You can have 3 non-shooters on the floor if you are creating space through player and ball movement. If you are setting screens, if you are actively moving, if you are running players around the court in order to get them open, you can play with only 2 shooters. You can do that. But you got to create those good looks and give your shooters a real chance. You can't ask them every night to shoot you out of trouble because you're not generating good looks. There are going to be nights when it's harder than others. There are going to be nights when you have to find something new to win the game. But overall, it just shows you that the Pelicans have not been committed either in personnel or in philosophy to taking and making three-point shots. We'll have more time for this kind of, analysis and breakdown throughout the offseason as we look to what the Pelicans can do to get better. I would love to get your thoughts. If you've got things that you want me to kind of look at and give my overview of with regards to the Pelicans, go ahead and leave those comments below. Continue to leave your questions. I really appreciate them. And they really help out, especially during the offseason, because you guys help generate a lot of the ideas for what I'm going to talk about each day here on the Post Up. So before we go, just want to remind you again, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you share, make sure you hit the notification bell so you can stay up with us at Boot Crew Media whenever we drop something new. You can follow me on social media at DM Grubb. It's right there on the screen. You can also look for me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Any one of those, I'll be glad to interact with you there. So until the next time, this has been the Post Up on Boot Crew Media. I will see you on Thursday. Y'all stay dry and stay out of the heat, and we'll talk again soon.